as Matt, before I put Matt in camera, as Matt is going to share his incredible, memorable event with us, we want to invite you to also, as you listen, check, be aware of what is happening in your body. What is the impact of his story in you? What feelings, thoughts, images, or memories arise in you? You may want to take notes so we don't forget, because sometimes these messages they come and we forget. So maybe there's a few words that you may like to write, okay? And then we will come back to these questions. But now let me introduce Miles. And we'll put a mic so the two of us, and let me meanwhile find, here it is. Okay. Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Good.
Okay, good.
Hi. Thank you for joining us and for being with these amazing people. We have 96 login right now from all over the world. And these are people that they are incredibly, we know them for 20 years, some of them even more. And there is a lovely community and a safe and beautiful place for you to come in and share your story.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Dr. Reed, for having me. I'm honored to be here today. I think it was really inspired by the quotes that you guys had all written that I got to see there. And I'm huge fans of Aaron and Dr. Reed. I've been as a mentor and a spiritual guide for me for many, many years. So I'm incredibly grateful to be here. Dr. Reed and Aaron asked me to kind of walk through a little bit just of my background. And then Aaron obviously referenced this extraordinary experience I had earlier this summer where they actually pronounced me dead and then brought me back to life. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit and what I learned from that experience. And hopefully I'm excited to learn from you guys in terms of how you interpret it and see all the wisdom that you've seen.
Matt, excuse me, before you go into the story, just to remind if you can speak a little bit slower than the usual, because we have simultaneous translators.
Okay.
Fly.
Yeah. Andrea and Luciano, Anna and Luciano are translating, right? You guys are okay?
Yes, it's fine.
Thank you. Good.
Okay. So before I go into the story, again, my background is that I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Omaze, and we raise money and awareness for charities by offering the chance to win once-in-a-lifetime experiences. So we've done everything from being the next Star Wars movie to play football with Ronaldo to ride in a tank with Arnold Schwarzenegger and crush things. And the way it works is rather than one high net worth individual paying $25,000 or $50,000 to have one of these experiences, we make it so anybody in the world can donate $10 for the chance to win. So it's like a global charity raffle. And as a result, it raises 2 to 40x for the charity, and everyone has a chance to win. And we've raised about $140 million for charities around the world from donors from 180 countries. Is that pace okay? Am I talking slow enough, or does that work? Okay. So in terms of the story, when I was born, my intestine was twisted in a knot. And so I was supposed to die when I was born, and they removed 2/3 of my small intestine. And 40 years later, the scar tissue from that surgery broke off and started creating, and I didn't know that, but I was experiencing a great deal of stomach pain for many days. And I've experienced stomach pain most of my life, so it wasn't too abnormal, but it got to the point where I called my friend who's a doctor who I went to school with, and I described what was going on. I also told him look, I have a date tonight with this girl I really like. It's our second date, and I really hope I can go on that. So I'm hoping you tell me this is something I don't need to attend to. And he said, after I described it, he said, I think you should go into the hospital. I think the worst case is that could be your appendix is bursting and you should go get it checked out. So I go to the emergency room. As I'm getting there, the pain starts to get more acute. I call the chief operating officer of our company, our COO, who's essentially our number 2, because I was supposed to meet her at that time. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't come. And she said, where are you? And I said, I'm in the emergency room. She said, well, who's with you? And I said, I'm by myself, but that's fine. It's just my stomach. And she said, no, I'm coming. Someone should be with you. And if she hadn't come, I would have died that night. So then cut to later in the hospital. She's there. Her name is Helen. My parents are there. Anna, who's the girl I was supposed to go on the second date with, also ended up there. And they said, we're not sure what's going on. We think it will unwind itself. And if not, we'll just do surgery in the morning. So my parents go home. Helen goes home. Anna stays. And speaking to kind of just the messages of the universe, Helen drives. She pulls into her house, which is 30 minutes away from the hospital, and she gets there and she cannot get out the door. She just physically feels like I have to go back to the hospital. Something was telling her she had to go back, and she's not the type of person who would usually react in that way. She's an incredibly kind of logical person in every way and very rigorous. And but she's like, I have to go back. So she drove back, and she wouldn't have come back. Like I said, I would have died that night, because she came back, and she came back initially because she was concerned the nurse had put a tube down my throat, and I was vomiting very violently. And then they realized that they hadn't hooked it up. And so she didn't feel good about the nurse, and she came back. She noticed that my blood pressure had dropped precipitously. And she went and got the nurse and said, look at this. He said, that can't be right. They brought in another machine. The blood pressure was just as low. We went to get another one. She said, no, let's get a doctor. She went and got the doctor. The doctor came back. They took one look at the condition, and they rushed me down into surgery. I came out of the surgery many hours later, and they said to my mom, the good news is that we figured out what it was. It was a bowel obstruction from when he was a baby. The bad news is his heart rate is continuing to plummet, and we don't know why. And he's in critical condition. So then a couple hours later, my brother and my dad come up from, they live an hour away, and my mom goes down to get them, and she's coming back upstairs from the garage in the elevator, and she hears over the loudspeaker code blue in room 437. And my mom works in a hospital, so she knows that means flatline, and she knows that's my room. So she rushes upstairs, and she gets to the door, and the nurse says to her, I'm sorry, you can't come in. This is really bad. And my mom says, look, I was there when he came in this world. If he's leaving this world right now, I need to be in that room. And so the nurse was moved by that, so she let her in the room. And she comes in, and she sees me, and I'm on the operating table, and they're doing CPR, and they're doing the electric shock treatment with the defibrillator. And my body is bouncing up and down, and I'm not responding. And so my mom looks at that, and as she explains, she starts to crumble. It's one thing to lose a child. It's another thing to be there when it's happening. And at the same time, a doctor was outside, and he saw another doctor, and he said to the other doctor in front of my brother and my dad, not knowing it was my brother and my dad, hey, we lost this kid. He's gone. And so my brother pushed my dad in the room and said, you should be there with mom. And so my dad came in, and my dad kind of came in from kind of behind. If find my mom kind of looking straight ahead where I am. My dad came in from over here. My mom kind of turned. My dad came in, and he's crying, bawling really loudly. My mom turns to him to say, "Dad, or Gary, you have to be quiet or they're going to kick us out of this room." And my dad's reaction was kind of like, I can't cry in this moment. Like, when can I cry? But my mom's, when she turned to say that to my dad, she saw something she said she'd never seen before in a hospital, which is every doctor, every nurse, every staff member in the ICU had kind of gathered outside the operating room, and they were just right outside looking through a window. And she turned and she saw them, and she said it looked almost as if they were lined up like a church choir, and there was 40 of them, and they were just leaning in, and you could just tell that they were sending in this positive energy. And she was so moved that these people that she did not know were sending love towards her son, that it just gave her this strength. It just filled her up. And she gathered herself, and she looked back at me, and they're continuing to do the compressions, and they're continuing to do the electric shock, and I was still not responding. And she started coaching me. She started saying, "Matthew David Polson, these people are fighting so hard to save your life. They are fighting so hard to bring you back to this world. Matthew David Polson, they are fighting so hard. You have to fight. You're not fighting hard enough, Matthew. Matthew David Polson, you have to show them you're a fighter." My mom just kept saying that for 4.5 minutes. The flatline went on for 4.5 minutes, which is an extraordinary amount of time in that situation. And right as she thought that they were going to call it, the doctor kind of leaned away, and she just thought, oh no. And right as he did that, he said, "Wait a second. I think we have a pulse." And my eyes opened up. And I looked up at my mom, and I looked up at my dad, and I smiled, and then I slowly raised my right arm, and I went like this, and then like this. And then I went I went back into kind of a coma for almost like another 36 hours. And so after that, the doctor who had done the initial surgery came down, and he's like, "What's going on?" And he starts to run the probabilities of survival, and it came back at 0%, even after they resuscitated me. And so he turns to my mom and says, this is not on a pace to end well. And she says, "I understand." He says, "No, you don't understand. His organs are shutting down." She said, "I understand, but 5 minutes ago we didn't have a pulse, and now we have a pulse. So what are we going to do about it?" And then he said, "Well, there's this thing called the ECMO machine. It takes over and oxygenates blood for the entire heart, but it's not a good option. Only about 50% of people who ever make it on that machine end up living. The other problem is that we're at UCLA in Santa Monica, and the ECMO was at UCLA in Westwood, so about 20 minutes away. And they've never taken it off of campus in the history of the hospital. And the other problem is there's only 2 doctors who do this surgery, and neither of them are on today because today is Father's Day. And there's only 4 nurses, and none of them are on. So at the same time, my friend that I had called originally to see if I should go in the hospital, he